Welcome to Access Beyond the Ramp, the 8th webinar in our Strengthening Ontario's Heritage Network webinar series. My name is Alison Little, and I'm the Program Manager at the Ontario Historical Society. Now, just a bit of background information for those of you who aren't familiar with the OHS. The Ontario Historical Society is a non-profit corporation and registered charity, a non-government group founded in 1888, bringing together people of all ages, all walks of life, and all cultural backgrounds interested in preserving some aspect of Ontario's history. And just so you know, 2014 marks the 126th anniversary of the Ontario Historical Society and the 101st anniversary of John Mackenzie House in Willowdale, which is our office and our home. A bit of information about our webinar today. We're going to start very shortly. I'm going to do a bit of technical support, introduce our speaker, and then we'll head right into John's presentation. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. So just a few things to go over on the technical side of things before we get started. In order to speak and ask, or in order to ask a question, you just type a question in the space provided below Question in the menu bar. If you can't see the question space, you may need to expand the question section menu in the menu by clicking on it. You'll see a space with Type a Question for Staff, and that's where you write. I'll be going over the questions during the seminar, and if there's a very common question that arises, I'll pass it on to John to answer, but most of the time I will keep the questions for the end and read them to John at the end of the webinar. If you have a comment to share with the whole group, please feel free to use the chat window. Earlier, just a few minutes ago, talking about our Twitter feed and using the hashtag #AccessHistory. So if you're on Twitter, please feel free to tweet at us at @OntarioHistory. If you run into trouble during the webinar and you need my help, you can also use the raised hand button. It's a small yellow hand also in your menu. Just click it and your hand will be raised and I'll ask what I can do to help. If you're finding that the slides are moving very slowly or your audio keeps cutting out, try closing a few other programs. The more bandwidth you're using, the harder the webinar program has to work. If you lose your connection, try closing the webinar window and then re-entering the room using the link you received in your email. Closing and restarting will often solve any problems. This webinar will be recorded, and that recording will be available to members on our website and later to the public through our YouTube channel. We will make today's slides available for download this week, so don't worry about writing everything down. Okay, so a bit of information about our speaker today. John Rae is best known as a disability rights activist, but considers himself first and foremost a human rights activist. John retired in 2005 after a 24-year career with the Ontario Public Service, during which time he was a consultant with the Centre for Disability in Work, an education officer with the former Employment Equity Commission, and finally a program officer with the Accessibility Directorate of Ontario. John has been a board member of many human and disability rights organizations. He's been a president of PAL Reading Service, the Canadian Legal Advocacy, Information and Research Association of the Disabled, the Blind Organization of Ontario with Self-Help Tactics, the Don Vale Community Centre, and co-chaired the Coalition on Human Rights for the Handicapped, which secured the first human rights coverage for persons with disabilities in Ontario. John was active in Canada's labour movement at the local, provincial, and national levels. In January 2006, he was elected to the board of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. More recently, John served on the Canadian Museum for Human Rights Inclusive Design Committee, and he currently serves as second vice president of the Council of Canadians with Disabilities National Council. So I'm going to give John control and just a moment while we get set up.
Is that working?
Yes.
Okay. Is that really me she was talking about? Anyway, thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm delighted to be here and want to thank the Ontario Historical Society again for giving me an opportunity to talk about increasing access for persons with disabilities in museums, art galleries, heritage properties, and other historic sites. I am a history lover who has had the opportunity to travel the world, and will probably include a story or two from my travels during the course of this webinar. I also want to particularly thank Alison for putting together the series of slides that will run during the course of this morning's webinar. They will hopefully supplement some of the points that I want to raise. So, to begin, I think this is a very timely opportunity for me because we live in times of paradox. On the one hand, On the downside, many art galleries and museums are struggling from a standpoint of budget, facing cutbacks. At the same time, we see the exciting opening of two major museums in Canada, the Aga Khan Museum here in Toronto and the Canadian Museum on Human Rights in Winnipeg, a museum that I've been involved with and we'll talk about at some point. I think we should be excited about these two major new facilities, but I am concerned about how many difficulties smaller local facilities are having, because our local history is as important to me as the history that has been collected from the far-flung parts of this planet. I would say that museums often began as places where the rich had the opportunity to display their collections of art or sculpture. Today, of course, museums have changed very dramatically and are certainly the storehouses of art and sculpture from around the world, but they are also places that do a lot more. They are places of history, of culture, and also of knowledge, dissemination, information, entertainment, and I submit have the opportunity to play a useful role for the disabled community in changing attitudes. No, I do not expect them to do the whole job, but I think they have a positive opportunity to play a useful role. We'll get into that a bit more later on. A few terms to begin with. Terms that are often used interchangeably, and I submit they probably shouldn't be. Those being accessibility, universal design, and inclusion. And we could debate how different those terms are, but let's not do that. I'm going to use them with this in mind, that accessibility will focus most on physical access. Universal design is basically designing a facility or a program so that it is usable by the broadest number of people without, that's the important word here, without the need for adaptations. And of course, inclusion means making your entire facility and everything that goes on in that facility accessible to, inclusive of, and welcoming of all members of our community. So let's start with access. Clearly, no one can participate if one can't get in. That goes without saying, I think. So where are you located? You are where you are. You have no choice on where you are unless we're building a new facility like we were doing in Winnipeg. Are you located on a bus route? Well, you may say, I have no choice in that matter. My facility is where it is. That's true. The Westfield Heritage Village in between Hamilton and Kitchener took a different view of that. They're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, really. A lovely facility if you can get there. And they worked with Canada Coach, the local inner-city bus, and convinced it to make a slight detour off of its route to stop at the village so that people who need public transit to get to and from the village had the opportunity to get there. This may not be an option for all places, but a lot of the stories that I may talk about are examples that may prove useful to what you are doing in your facility. Physical access is usually thought of as encompassing ramps and accessible washrooms. Those are, of course, important. As I said, if one can't get in, one can't take part. But access includes other things, reducing the amount of glary surfaces. providing a bench where older people like me can take a load off their feet for a little while, get our strength back, and carry on. Because I tend to want to spend more time in a museum than my back would like me to do. So there are lots of aspects of physical access. Fortunately, today, there is a growing amount of literature available that you can draw upon, including checklists that give you the opportunity to do your own site assessment. Of course, and I will come back to this point repeatedly, there is no better opportunity and no better approach than bringing in the real experts. That's us. We who are disabled know best what we need, and when you get into dealing with the disabled community, we are a diverse group. We comprise over 1/7 of Ontario's population, and I submit that at this point we represent an untapped group of additional patrons for your facility. Because a lot of us come with attitudes as well, and part of what needs to happen is a change in our attitudes. A lot of us are a bit fearful about going to your places. A lot of us figure, what's the point? They're probably not accessible. There's very little there that looks like me, and chances are I'm not going to get enough out of it to make it worth my while. Well, that may remain true, but it need not be. And today we're going to explore, well, we've already talked about physical access, but throughout the rest of the seminar we'll explore some of the other things that you can do. For me as a blind person, I want to put my own cards on the table right up front. And you'll notice that I come back to this once in a while. There is no substitute to tactile access to what you've got in your collection. There are other things you can do to present your collection to folks like me. There are other things you can do to make your work come alive to folks like me, but there is absolutely no substitute whatsoever for me than to have the opportunity to touch what's available. My favorite museum is in Copenhagen, the Ny Carlsberg Glyptotek. I was there one day happily inspecting their collection, which mainly consists of statuary from ancient times, back as far as probably 8,000 or 10,000 years. The stuff that makes me happy. And I was enjoying myself when one of the staff person approached me in a very, very nice manner and quietly said to me, "Would you mind putting on a pair of cotton gloves?" And I thought to myself, not my first choice, but if that's what it's going to take to enable me to continue my exploration of their magnificent collection, it's a decent choice. It's a good deal. And I did so and continued my exploration. Well, that was an opportunity to inspect, pretty much to my heart's content, their regular collection. And there's no substitute for being able to do that. Other aspects of your facility. How do you recruit staff? Do you basically rely on an old boys or old girls network? Or do you do some serious outreach into the community? How do you recruit volunteers? What kind of training are they given? How do you advertise your activities? It's one thing to make a facility accessible and a program welcoming, but if you don't tell the world, what's the point? people still won't come. We need to know. So how do you advertise your events? How do you work with your lecturers if you have lecturers? I go to a lot of ancient history lectures here in Toronto. Some lecturers have the knack of speaking to their audience and doing so at a level where one doesn't need to be an expert. On the other hand, some lecturers spend more of their time talking to their slides and do so at a level that you pretty much need a PhD in order to follow what they're talking about. Well, do you prime your speakers for a general audience? Some who may very well have a PhD, but others who simply have an interest in whatever the historical topic is that the lecturer is going to discuss. Perhaps the most exciting places in the world from a tactile standpoint, and this you may find rather amazing. There was an article a couple of years ago that indicates the Egyptian Museum in Cairo has trained a number of young blind people to give tactile tours for other blind people. I want one of those tours. And if I manage to get back to the Middle East next year, I'm very much hoping to meet one of those people and get one. I've had the opportunity to travel a number of places with a company in the UK called Traveleyes International, and one of my roommates had perhaps what some might consider the ultimate opportunity in tactile access. He, and he's not the only one, it's rare, but a number of tour groups have had the opportunity to go down into the pit where the terracotta warriors are on display. Amazing. I want that opportunity. I've been to Xi'an, but unfortunately didn't get that opportunity. But the point here is that if tactile access can be provided in those important places, it ought to be able to be provided here. I mentioned there are various ways of making your collections come alive. The Art Gallery of Ontario specializes in what it calls multisensory tours. And these involve a variety of components. Not all components will be a part of every tour, but they can involve the senses of smell, of hearing, music, of touch, and of verbal description. What I have found is most of the guides who conduct these tours, and it's the same in other places too, are very excited about what they're doing. And I am glad to say that it seems to be, for the most part, a two-way experience. We obviously gain through the description of art, clearly a very visual medium, but these guides also tell me, and as I say, I'm glad about this, that in preparing and in describing art to us, they benefit. They end up having a more in-depth appreciation of the paintings that they are describing. I'm glad about that. I want this to be a two-way experience. Some places involve raised line drawings of various kinds. Some places involve tactile replicas, and the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller, Alberta has an unbelievable gift shop. And surprising though it may sound to you, I suggest any visitor going to that museum start in the gift shop. Yes, I do mean it. Start in the gift shop. Because arrayed in that gift shop is an amazing array of critters in various materials, various sizes, keychains, stuffed animals, an amazing array of critters. So I suggest any visitor there start in the museum. Start in the gift shop, become conversant with what they may encounter, and then go on tour. I had the opportunity for a special tour of that wonderful place, and hope to make another visit there next time I'm out Calgary way. It's an amazing place. The new Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg is an excellent example of the benefits of involving the community. As I said earlier, I consider us to be the real experts. When I first visited what was then a construction site, the idea of making it really accessible and really inclusive didn't seem to be as far advanced as I wanted it to be. The first thing I had to do was get my head around the fact that this museum is different from many in that its focus is not on things like many museums are, although it does have some artifacts among its collection. It is way more about the conveying of information, and it does so through kiosks, obviously through lectures and through tours, and through all kinds of videos and other things. Well, once I became aware of the approach this museum was taking, that helped. They have an ongoing inclusive design accessibility committee, and I'm honored. I was honored to have been asked to serve on it. And I'm not suggesting that our committee takes much, if not all, of the credit for what has happened. No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I think we played a small role, but the first CEO of the museum, Stuart Murray, made what some might consider a brash statement. He stated that this museum would become the most accessible on the continent. Well, that's saying a lot. If we consider the Smithsonian in Washington, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and several others on this continent, he set the bar very high. I am pleased to say that this new museum may accomplish his stated goal. If it doesn't, it's going to come pretty close, I think, because over the years, the issue of accessibility has become an important aspect of the design of that new facility, and I must say it was exciting being involved on really the ground floor, because when I first got there, it was a construction site. It was still in the process of being built. There were opportunities to have impact on how the finished product would turn out. I believe the committee has had some. I think the amount of attention that is being paid to sign language interpretation in both official languages, to providing audio description of videos, I think the committee can take some of the credit for the amount of attention that facility is putting on accessibility. I also would say that some of the staff have really been wonderful to work with and have shown amazing commitment to this. But I think it shows how important involving the community can be. People with various disabilities. Because, as I said, our group is diverse. Some of us have communication barriers. Some of us need sign language. Some of us need information in plainer language that is understandable. We are not a homogeneous group. We aren't. And for some, we are probably seen as a challenge. I hope for you and for others, we are seen as simply another part of the community whose needs need to be accommodated and incorporated into the things you do. Some places use audio guides. One of the best I have encountered is at Casa Loma here in Toronto. And I would describe it as sort of a two-level guide. Casa Loma now uses self-guided tours. And these wands enable you to get a basic description of where you are. It will say you're in this room, turn to your right and you will see, and it's whatever. And if you want more information, push 99 and you can get more information. So for a person like me who will get intrigued by some of the items that are on display, one has the opportunity to push a different button and get much, much more information about a particular artifact. Because I often want to know what motivated the painter or sculptor to create their painting or sculpture. When was it done? Who was the person? And where and in what political context was it created? That's kind of my standard list of questions. Sometimes, of course, the answer is we don't know, because sometimes we don't. That's an acceptable answer, because sometimes we won't know. I'm always disappointed when that's the answer, but realistically, sometimes that is the answer. It's unfortunate, but sometimes it is the answer. Most of you will have websites. How accessible are they? How much of their content are the cursed PDF? I can't give you my description of PDF because Allison is recording this. She won't let me. Let's say I have a very dim view of the PDF format. And it's not that PDFs can't be created accessibly. They can. I'm not young enough like she is to know how to do this stuff. Some of you probably do. But the PDF format is the most inaccessible. It creates the greatest amount of problems. So what do we do about this? Well, there's several solutions. My preferred format is never use it. That's the simplest. Never use it. But you will say, we like it. That's fine. Some of you will say, other people prefer it. Maybe it's easier to include graphics and pictures. I don't know. I'm not a techie. But that's all fine. That's all fine. I believe in choice. Even PDF as the choice. But if that is going to be the choice, then what I suggest is you create either an HTML or Word version of the same document and put both up on your website. Many places do this. And that gives people the opportunity to choose which version they like better, and it also ensures the greatest degree of accessibility. How are we on time, Allison?
Just going to touch your shoulder. We're about on there.
Oh, okay. This is going faster than I thought. That's all right. In terms of the future, clearly there is a greater and greater use of technology. One of the major issues that I have focused on through the IDAC committee at the Human Rights Museum are the kiosks that they are going to use and that now are there. I'm looking forward to our next meeting because we're going to actually get a tour of the museum, open and fully operational. Last time I was in it, it was still very much a work in progress and a work site. But I have felt the keypad that they are going to use for the kiosk. I haven't actually experienced one in action, but I was assured throughout the last several years that their kiosk would be fully accessible and usable, because this is, after all, a place that first and foremost is presenting information. Kiosks are a good way to do it. Other things, technology is also being used in other ways. Sometimes tours can be downloaded to a person's own iPhone. Some places, like the ROM in Toronto, put some tours, accessible tours with description, up on their website. The art gallery has an audio description of the collection of ships that was provided by the Thompson estate. I think we will see more and more virtual tours. And again, do they have good verbal accompaniment? Do they have sign language? Do they have good audio description? These are aspects that make any tour more and more accessible to everybody. And I think probably two other things that I want to cover, and I intimated it one earlier, and that is there anything in your collection that will remind us of us? Are persons with disabilities represented in your collections? It's something you may never have thought about. If not, I invite you to take a look at your collections and answer that question for yourselves. And you can answer it to me too if you like. But the more that a group of people sees things like us included, the more likely we are to come. Now, there was an interesting study done in the United Kingdom about this very topic, a paper called Rethinking Disability Representation, easy to find on the internet. And the conclusions of this study I find interesting. They talked to a bunch of curators. They were not unsympathetic to the idea of including representations of persons with disabilities in their facilities. They weren't, but they were concerned. They were concerned about how their patrons would react. Would they react with stares? Would they react with inappropriate comments? And to what extent should they draw patrons' attention to the fact that this is a person with a disability? These are fascinating questions. I believe that all persons need to be, and all groups need to be reflected. And I believe that while I don't expect museums and art galleries and historic properties to change attitudes overnight. That doesn't happen. I believe they can perform a useful part of this. We have seen the discourse on disability move from what we call in the disability rights movement the medical model, where the issues that we confront every day were basically pegged on our disability. We've moved to what is now referred to as the social model of disability, where the construction of society are the primary barriers that impede our equality, and we want to get rid of them. I am of the view that this new discourse is positive, but it hasn't gone far enough. I'm suggesting that we need to move beyond the social model of disability and talk about, well, as I say, I call it beyond the social model of disability, because the problem with that new model, that new paradigm, is it's only discourse. It's only talk. Talk is useful. The way in which we talk about a group in society is important. But that talk, in my mind, has failed to change what I would call the power imbalance. It has failed to bring the bulk of us into the mainstream. And I submit that unless and until more of us work in the boardrooms where decisions about technology are made, until more of us work in the editorial rooms of magazines and newspapers where decisions of what stories are made and what kind of slant will be given, until more of us work in the offices of ministers, including premiers and prime ministers, where decisions about policies and programs are made, we are likely to remain on the sidelines, out of the mainstream, and that's not where we want to go. So that kind of societal imbalance needs to be changed, and I submit that in order to do that, we need to move beyond what I think is a useful kind of discourse in terms of the social model of disability. And of course, finally, and I come back to one of the points I made at the very beginning, and that is that for me as a blind person, there is absolutely no substitute whatsoever to being able to touch the objects in your collection. There's just no substitute whatsoever. That gives an appreciation of the material that it's made out of. It gives an appreciation of the real thing. Replicas, raised line drawings are useful. They are useful. They do provide an idea of what the real thing is like. So they are useful. But I want to be able to touch the real thing. That's what I want. And I am sympathetic to the position taken by curators, that there's danger. I don't deny that. I am not totally naive in that regard. But think about a fairly large facility. It probably has not only what is on the floor, which does change, but it probably has lots of other things in storage. And if you assume that a specialized tour of about 8 to 10 blind people over the course of about an hour and a half realistically covers 8 to 10, maybe 12 pieces, because we need time to feel it, then we need time to discuss it, the number of times during the course of a year that any one object needs to be touched is minuscule. And so I submit that curators have reasonable concerns, but from my way of thinking, they're a paranoid lot. They're a paranoid lot. And so we have challenges. And I guess finally, the challenge is to help our community change some of our thinking about your facilities. And that's happening slowly. And maybe that's not surprising. A lot of the community also needs to have their views changed. We're not alone, but the more that your facilities become accessible and welcoming and inclusive, and the more that you convey that information to our community, and there is no better way than involving us through committees, through consultations, through special tours, through whatever. Developing that kind of partnership with your community is something that is not unfamiliar to you. It's not. And nowadays, in all aspects of community life, we talk more and more about developing partnerships. This ought to be no exception. There are members like me in our communities who are anxious to take part, to do seminars for you, to help you with information you need. You can find those people. Sometimes it takes a bit of work, but we're out there, and we're anxious to be helpful, to help you make your facilities more inclusive, more accepting, and more welcoming. And now I'll take some questions.
Thanks very much, John. So as I just typed into the chat window, I'd love for anyone who has questions to submit them to John, but I'll get the ball rolling and use one of my questions. Earlier today, John, you and I were talking about historical houses. We need to talk about Casa Loma. I know that we have a few attendees who are at historical homes or historical properties, and I'm wondering if you can tell us what historical houses can do better. What can they do better to be more accessible? Whether it's a simple thing or something you've noticed that consistently is a problem, what would you suggest to historical house volunteers and staff that they can do better? And I'll hold the mic in front of you there.
Well, I think I've given you pretty much the agenda that they can do. They can provide tactile opportunities. They can do special tours. They can create audio guides. They can do a better job of making their premises accessible, and they can communicate to the community what they're doing. Some of these places will have lectures, will have classes, will have a variety of programs. Those are all useful, probably of interest to some members of our community. We need to know about them.
Thank you, John. Another question from one of our attendees. Can you tell us what is one of the best uses of an assistive technology you've come across in an institution, whether it's something really simple or an elaborate new kind of computer technology? Is there something there that you thought, wow, we should all have these? And keeping in mind that we have attendees here from a variety of institutions. Some may have a big budget for technology, others may have no budget at all. So is there something out there that you thought was really the way things should be heading?
Technology is not my specialty, as you know. Mm-hmm. But clearly, a lot of you will have kiosks of one kind or another. Do they have flat screens that I can't operate? Or will they have keypads? That's a simple adaptation. Some places will enable a person to download a tour into their own device, their own cell phone, iPhone. So those are a couple of examples.
Great, thanks, John. And I actually asked you about this earlier today, but what are your thoughts on 3D printing technology? I know some of us will know what that is. It's sort of using a gel material to actually print objects, and a lot of museums are doing this to print replicas of their collections. Have you come across that, or what are your thoughts on 3D printing for museums?
Replicas of any kind are useful. I particularly remember the the Largo Museum in Lima, where they create replicas of pre-Incan vessels. We don't really know what they were used for. They have a fairly extensive collection. In fact, I got to touch some of the real things, but the group that I was with, they assembled about 20 pieces on 3 tables, and we rotated table to table, got to touch and inspect them. It's an amazing collection. Then they actually gave us a piece to take home, which I was very delighted to have. That's a use of replicas. Now, drawings, some people do better with drawings than others. If I had become familiar with using drawings at a younger age, I think I would do better. Some drawings are very complicated, and of course, depending upon what you're trying to depict, sometimes they need to be. Models like what you described are useful. They have the same problem that any of these, what I call substitutions, have, and that is they aren't giving me the chance to touch the real thing, but they all have their place. They are all useful, and especially for items that are too fragile to touch, and there are some that are too fragile to touch. I recognize that. And for paintings, obviously touching a painting isn't going to get you very far. So developing a raised line drawing of the painting, or using materials to depict the content of a painting, anything that is going to help make your collections come alive for us, they are all worth doing. They're all useful. Some places develop these depictions just by the use of string. It need not be particularly expensive. Sometimes it may be, but I think that here you can develop relationships with museum classes if your local community offers one, because a lot of times students have projects they have to do, and some of them can be extremely inventive. And given that they're young, they were probably born with technology in their hands. So in terms of developing uses of the coming technology, they are uniquely and very well positioned to help you in that regard. So any of those substitute mechanisms, Allison, and everyone, they're all useful, but again, they are no substitute in my mind to being able to touch the real thing.
Great. Well said, John. Thank you. I just wanted to touch briefly on something you talked about during your talk, representation of persons with disabilities. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that, and maybe tell us if there's an example or an instance where you thought that it was really well done, the representation or incorporation of persons with disabilities into an exhibit or a program. If you can think of an example that we can point to and say, this is a really good job, well done.
Well, there was a special exhibit, and I'm not big on special exhibits, but it was called Out From Under. It was developed by students at Ryerson University here in Toronto, where they brought an example of, it was an artifact that some group in the disability community had used at some point. So one of them was a trunk. You may wonder, what's the connection? Well, a lot of us went away to residential schools. Our Aboriginal community folks are not the only ones who have had to deal with residential schools. I'm not suggesting that our experience was quite as negative as our Aboriginal community was, but many of us went away to school as well. This exhibit is part of the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg now. But I'm more interested in having examples of disability incorporated into other exhibits. And I'm told by one of my friends in Winnipeg that in the depiction of the Holocaust at the Human Rights Museum, one of the things they talk about was the extensive number of persons with disabilities who were exterminated as well, because it wasn't just Jews, gypsies, persons with disabilities, any group that wasn't seen to be the perfect group were subject to mass extermination as well. Our community suffered greatly. And so that aspect of the topic is talked about. Folks, persons with disabilities are a part of every community, a part of every race, a part of every country, part of every society. And it's often too easy to separate us out. We want to become part of the regular community. We want to be seen as a regular part of social life and the social fabric of any community. And so the more that issues that affect us can be incorporated as a portion of a broader exhibit, that makes a statement of itself. That makes a statement of inclusion. And that's the kind of statement that you have the opportunity to make for us. And that's part of what I was referring to earlier when I spoke about the positive effect that museums and art galleries can have in changing public attitudes about persons with disabilities by including us as part of what you're doing.
Great, thank you, John. Sort of on that note, but talking more about staff and the people who work or volunteer at institutions, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on people who work or volunteer at institutions but aren't the education staff or the program staff. They're not the frontline folks who are giving accessible tours or sensory tours, but people who work at different parts of the institution, whether it's selling tickets or whether they're in human resources or they're a researcher. Is there anything you would say they should keep in mind about accessibility and inclusion in going about their work? So I'm wondering if there's anything you have to say about those roles.
Do outreach to attract them. That would be my primary part. But hopefully you do training. You do training of staff, you do training of volunteers. Part of that training should include how to deal with patrons who have a disability, who are likely to come through your doors. Obviously, people like me can help you with that aspect of your training. But training, hopefully, is a regular part of what you do. Training of staff, training of volunteers. Well, given that, as I say, we comprise 1/7 of the population, it seems only logical that part of your training should be about the overall diversity of patrons you're going to attract, that you hope to attract, that you're trying to attract. So it just seems to me that a logical part of your training initiatives would be on issues, on the broad range of issues about diversity.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to end with this question because we're getting close to our finish time from another attendee. John, you've been on so many tours and to many different institutions around the world, and they're wondering if there's something you've encountered amongst docents or tour guides or people giving programs that you think is a fantastic practice, or something a docent has done, or guides you've met at different institutions that you see repeated that you thought, yes, this is how it should be done. Is there something you can give us at the end of this presentation to take away that our attendees can broadcast to their volunteers and staff and people working with visitors? What should they know?
I wish all questions were as easy as that one. That's easy. Talk a lot.
Excellent.
Talk a lot. For me, I don't see what I'm standing in front of. I don't see the painting. I don't see the sculpture unless you put it into my hand. Talk a lot. And the good thing is that people who I've encountered as guides or docents, they're generally very good. I don't know if that's because of the training they receive, although I'm sure that helps, but it may be that the kind of person who volunteers to be a guide or a docent is just good at describing. And I have this little trick. I will often ask different people, what do you see? What jumped out at you? Let's take a painting. What jumped out at you? I may get differing answers to that question. Yes, I might. That's okay. That's fine. I don't mind that. Just describe what you consider important in that painting. Different people approach that task different ways. Some will do it via a quadrant description. You know, the top left contains sky, the bottom left includes people, whatever. Some people will go directly to what they consider is the most active part or the central aspect of what is being conveyed. That too is okay. I don't think there's really any rules to this. What I want a docent or guide to do is to make that piece come alive to me. Well, I think different approaches can accomplish that. And so the more that you tell me, the more that you tell a group, I'm likely to ask my standard list of questions if you're not telling me what I'd like to hear. But generally, I have found that guides and docents who do these specialized tours tend to be very enthusiastic, tend to be very knowledgeable, and they are very anxious to convey their interest and their enthusiasm to us. So just talk a lot. That's what we need. Talk a lot.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And that's a great note to end on. I'm just going to remind everyone, we talked about this in our promotion of the webinar, but John is the author of the Access Beyond the Ramp series of articles for the Ontario Historical Society. So if you're not familiar with that series, they're on our website, and we will provide a link in our follow-up PDF resources that we're going to mail out this week, or email out rather. But it's for those of you who are quite keen, www.ontariohistoricalsociety.ca/accessibility, and it's a series of articles John's written for us the past few years. And like I said, this webinar has been recorded, and we will make that recording available to members and eventually the public. And we will be emailing you all with John's contact information and some resources this week to follow up on and explore.
So if any of you were bashful during the webinar, which I hope you weren't, I welcome your getting in touch with me, and if I can be of help to the work you're doing in your own facility, I'm available to be called upon, so feel free to get in touch.
Perfect. So I'm just going to switch slides and we'll wrap up. Just a moment, please. All right, so as I mentioned, we do like to hear from you and improve our webinar experience. So in the email you'll be receiving this week, there will be a link to a post-webinar survey. We really appreciate if you fill that out and give us a bit of feedback. Let us know what went right, what went wrong, and what you'd like to see in the future. And if you're just interested in telling me what webinars you'd like to see, please feel free to email me, Alison Little, at alittle@ontariohistoricalsociety.ca. Always welcome to suggestions and questions and more feedback for future webinars. Just a reminder, we do have more webinars coming up. In January of 2015, we're planning to offer financial management for heritage organizations. And this will be led by Heather Young, who's an instructor in arts administration and cultural management at Humber College here in Toronto. And then in March until April 2015, we're partnering with Community Heritage Ontario to offer a series of webinars of training for municipal heritage committees members. So those are folks who are joining municipal heritage committees or are looking to join them. This will be a series of training webinars that Community Heritage Ontario has decided to offer. So you can find out more about our webinar series at www.ontariohistoricalsociety.ca/webinars. You can register there, and if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter, we'll always be tweeting or posting about the next upcoming sessions. Just a reminder, if you want to become a member of the OHS, there are some wonderful benefits. Not only do you get discounted admission to webinars and events and sessions, you receive a discounted subscription to our scholarly journal, Ontario History, 5 annual issues of our newsletter, OHS Bulletin, and access to members-only online content on our new website soon to launch, including past webinars, speakers' notes, and upcoming content in our blog, The Well. So if you're interested in becoming a member, get in touch with our membership coordinator, Christina, and you see her email there is members@ontariohistoricalsociety.ca. I'd like to thank John today for being a wonderful speaker. It's so lovely to have you here in the house. And also I wanted to thank Lisa Hunter of Westfield Heritage Village, Carrie Ann Lund of the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology, and Melissa Smith at the Art Gallery of Ontario for providing some images for our slideshow today. Thank you everyone for participating, and thank you, John. Thanks everyone very much, and have a great day.